The rich lady sneered at her uniform and whispered to the room, "Let's see if you can even play." Every eye turned toward Amara as the priceless violin was shoved into her hands. Her fingers trembled, the crowd laughed, but the first note she played froze every mouth, every phone, every smug smile. Nobody expected this. Before we continue, we'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you enjoy inspiring stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a moment of the drama and talent.
3 hours earlier, Amara Williams had tied her long hair into a tight braid in the cramped, fluorescent-lit break room of Manhattan's most exclusive catering company. The cracked mirror reflected a woman who had learned to move through spaces where she wasn't meant to belong, her uniform crisp, but her eyes carrying a quiet wariness. At 28, she had perfected the art of invisibility, a smile here, a nod there, a practiced efficiency that kept the wealthy guests happy and the managers oblivious to the exhaustion lingering behind her polite expression. Tonight was the annual Arts for All charity gala, an event where Manhattan's elite gathered in glittering ballrooms to showcase wealth, power, and, nominally, their love for the arts. Amara had delivered trays of champagne and canapés countless times, always observing from the margins, always dreaming from afar. The irony wasn't lost on her. This gala raised millions for inner-city music programs. Yet the very people who could have benefited most were invisible, relegated to the corners with their aprons and trays. Her grandmother's medicine bottles rattled softly in her purse, a familiar reminder of why she endured this life. Every insult, every scoff, every condescending smile was a small price to pay for stability. She had learned that the world rarely handed out opportunities for talent, especially for someone who looked like her. But music, her first love, her escape, remained untouchable, tucked into the private corners of her life, like a secret only she could understand. Meanwhile, the gala's main attraction gleamed under the spotlight, a 1947 Guarneri del Gesù violin, worth over $3 million, rested on a pedestal in the center of the ballroom. The rare instrument had been donated by an anonymous collector, and tonight it would be the centerpiece of the live auction. Guests sipped champagne, whispered about their donations, and adjusted their designer gowns, completely unaware of the tension building backstage. Enter Clarissa Vandermeer, the rich lady who had been making waves in social circles for her flamboyant displays of wealth and her penchant for humiliating those she deemed unworthy. Dressed in a diamond-studded gown that shimmered with every movement, she floated through the room like a predator, scanning for her next entertainment. Her eyes settled on Amara, and a cruel smile curled her lips. "Let's have some fun," Clarissa whispered to her companions, her voice just loud enough for a few nearby guests to catch. "This one looks promising." Within moments, Amara found herself ushered toward the stage. Clarissa's perfectly manicured hands pushed the $3 million violin into her trembling fingers. The weight was literal and metaphorical, a burden of expectation, derision, and disbelief. The crowd's laughter grew, some recording the scene on their phones, eager to witness what they assumed would be a spectacle of failure. Amara's mind raced, flashes of her life colliding in rapid succession. Memories of her first violin lessons, of her grandmother encouraging her to practice despite the world's indifference, of nights spent perfecting scales in the dim light of their apartment, all of it led to this moment. Her fingers tightened around the bow. Every ounce of fear, doubt, and anticipation coalesced into a singular, quiet determination. Clarissa leaned closer, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Play something classical for your betters, darling, and remember, the humiliation will be delicious if you fail." The room fell into an expectant hush. Waiters froze mid-step, glasses hovered in mid-air, and even the chandeliers seemed to pause as the tension thickened. Amara could feel the eyes of every guest upon her, a tangible weight pressing her shoulders down. For a heartbeat, she imagined stepping back, letting the laughter win, letting the rich lady's scorn define her. But then she drew a deep breath, centering herself on the music that had been her lifeline since childhood. This was no longer just a performance. It was a reckoning. Every note she played would not just echo through the gilded ballroom, it would echo through the walls of every injustice, every dismissive glance, every whispered assumption about who she was or what she could achieve. Clarissa's laughter, sharp and glittering, rang out one last time before it was drowned by the first trembling, hesitant note that escaped Amara's violin. And just like that, the room froze. Every cruel laugh, every smirk, every phone pointed toward her, all halted in midair. Nobody had expected this.
The room's laughter hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and suffocating. Amara's fingers trembled as she adjusted the bow against the strings of the priceless Guarneri del Gazzu violin. Every eye in the ballroom seemed to pierce her, measuring her worth, mocking her presence. Clarissa Vandermeer, perched like a queen on the edge of the stage, leaned forward with a smirk, clearly relishing the spectacle. "Don't take too long, sweetheart," Clarissa purred, her voice a velvet dagger. "We're all dying to hear if you even belong here." The crowd murmured, phones raised, cameras focused. Some guests whispered cruel jokes, others exchanged skeptical glances, but all waited for the inevitable failure. The stage lights reflected off the polished marble floor, blinding Amara for a moment. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the sound of her own rapid breathing. She could have dropped the violin, could have fled backstage, could have let the world's laughter win. But that would have been surrender, and surrender was something her grandmother had never allowed her to practice. Memories flashed through her mind, a tiny apartment with cracked walls, evenings spent practicing while her siblings slept, her grandmother whispering encouragement as Amara struggled to master the bow. Every note she had ever played, every hour she had devoted to perfecting her craft, had led to this single moment. The violin felt impossibly heavy, not in weight, but in responsibility. It wasn't just about performing for the elite. It was about claiming a space in a world that constantly reminded her she didn't belong. Amara closed her eyes for a brief second, seeking the calm she had felt during solitary nights with music as her only companion. Clarissa's voice cut through her focus. "Tick-tock, darling, don't keep us waiting. I have far more important things to do than watch someone embarrass themselves." She laughed lightly, but the sound was sharp, like breaking glass. Her cronies snickered in agreement, echoing her cruelty. Amara's knees threatened to buckle under the weight of expectation, the ballroom's eyes heavy upon her. But then, deep inside, something shifted. Fear and doubt began to transform into resolve. The ridicule, the mockery, the condescension, it all melted into a single force driving her forward. She wasn't just playing for these strangers, she was playing for herself, for her grandmother, for every silent, unseen child whose talent had been dismissed. She remembered the first time she had picked up a violin, a small wooden instrument, scratched and worn. Her grandmother had told her, "Music doesn't care about who you are, Amara. It only asks that you listen, that you feel, and that you dare to let it speak through you." Those words had carried her through years of doubt, through jobs where she was invisible, through nights when she thought her dreams were too big for someone like her. The crowd leaned forward, sensing hesitation. Some raised eyebrows, waiting for the anticipated failure. A few servers watched from the sidelines, silently rooting for her, wishing the world could witness the hidden brilliance often buried beneath ordinary uniforms. Clarissa, growing impatient, waved her hand toward the stage manager. "Maybe someone should take the violin back. Or better yet, let's see if she can even find a note. I'd love to see her squirm." Amara's grip on the bow tightened. The polished strings glinted under the chandelier lights, almost daring her to prove them all wrong. She positioned the bow above the strings, took a deep breath, and let the past, the struggle, and the determination converge into one quiet, focused thought. I can do this. I will do this. Then, as if the room held its breath with her, she pressed the bow lightly against the strings. The first note was soft, delicate, almost hesitant, but perfect. A shiver ran through the ballroom. Phones paused mid-recording, whispers halted, and even Clarissa's smirk faltered as the sound washed over the audience. The note carried more than music. It carried history, perseverance, and the quiet power of someone underestimated for too long. For the first time that evening, the crowd didn't laugh. They didn't speak. They listened. Every sarcastic comment, every mocking glance seemed suspended in midair, unable to pierce the moment. Amara's confidence began to grow with each passing second. The initial tremor in her fingers steadied. Her bow danced across the strings with precision and emotion, telling a story far beyond what any words could capture. The elite attendees, who had come expecting ridicule and entertainment, were instead witnessing the raw, undeniable power of talent unrecognized for too long. Clarissa, frozen in disbelief, leaned back. Her laughter had vanished, replaced by confusion, irritation, and a creeping sense of vulnerability. For the first time in her life, she was unsure of the outcome. The tables had shifted, and Amara was no longer just a waitress on stage. She was the master of the room, the one commanding attention through nothing more than skill and courage.
The moment the first note resonated, the ballroom transformed. The polite murmurs, the hushed whispers, and the scattered laughter all evaporated into a stunned silence. Amara's bow danced across the strings of the Guarneri del Gazzu violin with a precision and emotion that defied expectation. Every subtle movement produced sound that seemed to float above the heads of the audience, wrapping around them like an invisible current. Guests who had been sipping champagne mid-conversation froze, eyes wide, phones still raised but forgotten. The sound was delicate yet commanding, fragile yet powerful, a paradox that left everyone struggling to comprehend what they were hearing. The rich lady, Clarissa Vandermeer, whose smug confidence had dominated the room just minutes before, felt a creeping unease. Her carefully polished smile faltered as her eyes widened in disbelief. Amara's music told a story the elite could not have anticipated. Each note carried fragments of her life. Nights of practice in dimly lit apartments, moments of doubt and perseverance, and dreams that had been shelved while she served the world around her. The violin sang not just a melody, but a life lived quietly, unseen yet brimming with brilliance. As she continued, the performance grew bolder. Arpeggios leapt and fell like shimmering waves, and rapid scales cascaded from her bow like bursts of sunlight through storm clouds. The audience, initially gathered for spectacle, now found themselves held captive by the sheer force of talent and emotion. Some guests blinked rapidly, as if trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. The rich lady's cronies exchanged uneasy glances, murmurs dying on their lips. Clarissa's fingers drummed nervously against her diamond-encrusted clutch. She had orchestrated this moment to humiliate, to showcase superiority, but the tables had turned. Every smug remark she had made, every snide whisper about Amara's uniform and station now seemed painfully hollow. For the first time, she was powerless. The room no longer followed her lead, it followed Amara's bow. Amara's eyes closed as she poured herself fully into the music. She had become both storyteller and protagonist, guiding the listeners through valleys of despair, peaks of triumph, and the subtle, quiet moments of hope that had kept her alive. The melody reached a crescendo, and a collective gasp swept through the crowd. Even the servers standing at the edges of the ballroom felt goosebumps rising, witnessing the transformation of a woman they had always seen as invisible into someone undeniably extraordinary. The richness of the sound seemed to make the chandeliers tremble,
Or perhaps it was only the power of Amara's presence that shook the room. The polished marble reflected not just light, but the awe on each face. Every hand holding a phone hesitated, as if sacredly unwilling to capture a moment that could never be replicated. Clarissa, desperate to reclaim control, opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her tongue felt heavy. Her authority had been swallowed by the overwhelming beauty of the performance. She had underestimated not only Amara's skill, but her courage, her poise, and the quiet fire that had fueled her every move. The final notes rang out like a gentle thunderclap. Silence followed, a silence so profound that it felt as though the entire city beyond the ballroom had paused to listen. Then, almost simultaneously, the crowd erupted into applause. Hands clapped, feet stamped, and even the most skeptical guests were on their feet, faces alight with admiration and shock. Some cried, some laughed nervously, and many reached for their phones, eager to immortalize the moment, but none could replicate the impact of hearing it live. Amara lowered her violin, chest heaving, her uniform slightly wrinkled from the tension, but her spirit radiant. She had claimed her space, demanded recognition, and done it with grace, skill, and dignity. The rich lady, Clarissa, could only sit frozen, her confidence shattered, forced to witness the very brilliance she had tried to suppress. The room, once poised for humiliation, now celebrated the triumph of talent, perseverance, and the quiet power of those underestimated by the world. For Amara, it was more than applause. It was vindication, validation, and the first step towards a life where she would no longer be invisible.
The final note lingered in the air like a suspended heartbeat. A single, perfect sound that seemed to cleanse the room of every mocking whisper and sneer. Silence fell, utter, reverent, unbroken. Even the chandeliers seemed to shimmer more brightly, reflecting the astonishment and awe in the eyes of the audience. Amara lowered the violin carefully, her chest rising and falling with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. For a moment, nobody moved. The rich lady, Clarissa Vandermeer, sat frozen, her diamond-studded gown catching the light, but her usual poise was gone. Her smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, confusion, and just barely humiliation. She had expected failure, a spectacle to entertain her and her cronies. Instead, she had witnessed excellence, raw, undeniable, and untouchable. Then, as if on cue, the room erupted. Applause thundered, a wave of claps, whistles, and cheers that echoed through the ballroom. Guests rose to their feet, some clapping until their hands ached, others wiping tears from their eyes. Phones still captured the moment, but even the digital recording could not contain the electric energy that had been unleashed by Amara's talent. Clarissa's cronies looked to her for direction, but she offered none. Her authority had crumbled. The carefully constructed hierarchy she relied upon was in tatters. Her attempts to recover, to make a sarcastic remark, or to redirect attention, faltered. Words caught in her throat. For the first time, the power dynamic in the room had shifted. Amara, the woman she had tried to belittle, was the one commanding every gaze, every whispered conversation, and every ounce of admiration. Amara's gaze swept across the room, meeting eyes that had once overlooked her. The gala, meant to celebrate elite generosity, now celebrated her courage, her perseverance, and her brilliance. One by one, wealthy patrons approached, shaking her hand, complimenting her skill, and asking how they could support her journey. Offers of mentorship, invitations to perform, and inquiries about her training poured in like a tide she had never expected, but deserved. Clarissa, still seated, tried to muster composure.
Her lips parted, but the words that emerged were awkward, strained apologies that sounded hollow even to her own ears. She had underestimated Amara, dismissed her, and attempted to turn her into entertainment. Now she was a spectator to her own misjudgment, and the humiliation she had once sought for Amara had turned back on her. Amara, however, was gracious. She offered a polite nod, her eyes warm but unwavering. She had not come to humiliate. She had come to perform, to express, to assert herself in a world that had long ignored her. There was no gloating, no malice, only the quiet dignity of someone who had earned respect through excellence. The crowd continued to cheer, the clapping resonating like a heartbeat that reaffirmed the triumph of perseverance and talent. Even the servers and staff who had watched from the edges with admiration felt a surge of pride. Amara had not just played a violin. She had played the story of every underestimated individual who had been told they did not belong. Clarissa's once commanding presence now seemed small and brittle, a stark contrast to Amara's growing aura of quiet authority. She had learned, in the most public of ways, that arrogance and cruelty could not suppress genuine talent. The room, now united in admiration, bore witness to a simple truth: brilliance cannot be denied, and it always finds its stage. Amara stepped back, allowing the audience's applause to wash over her. The performance was over, but the impact lingered, etching her name and her courage into the minds of everyone present that evening.
The applause gradually subsided, leaving a gentle hum of admiration in the room. Amara Williams stood on the stage, the once priceless violin now feeling like an extension of herself rather than a burden. Her uniform, slightly wrinkled and plain compared to the glittering gowns around her, no longer mattered. She had proven something far more powerful than appearances or wealth. Talent, courage, and persistence could command respect in any room. Guests who had gathered expecting entertainment at someone else's expense now looked upon her with awe. Invitations and congratulations flowed rapidly. Patrons wanted to hear her play again. Sponsors asked about her background, and several prominent musicians offered mentorship. The night's gala, meant to celebrate elite generosity, had instead highlighted the triumph of an overlooked, underestimated individual. Clarissa Vandermeer, the rich lady who had sought to humiliate Amara, now sat frozen at her table. She had expected mockery, applause at someone else's expense, but instead she witnessed something she could neither control nor diminish. Her arrogance, carefully polished over years of social dominance, had shattered in a single performance. It was a lesson in humility, one she would carry long after the gala lights dimmed. Amara, though exhausted, felt a lightness in her chest she had never known. Every harsh word, every invisible moment, every sacrifice made in quiet perseverance had led to this night. She had transformed fear into art, humiliation into triumph, and doubt into undeniable proof of her brilliance. As she descended from the stage, staff and servers congratulated her softly, their eyes shining with pride. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for every underdog, every person overlooked because of their appearance, background, or station in life. The music had become a voice for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. Later, standing at the edge of the gala hall, Amara allowed herself a quiet smile. The violin, once a symbol of impossible expectations, had become a bridge to opportunity. She had been seen, truly seen, and the world had applauded, not for wealth, not for connections, but for pure, undeniable talent. And now she could finally take the next step. A prominent music school had offered her a scholarship, and invitations for private performances began to fill her inbox. Amara's journey had only just begun, but she had already rewritten her story, proving that determination and skill could rise above privilege and prejudice. Final inspirational punchline for viewers. Never let anyone's doubt define your path. Sometimes the world expects silence, but your first note might just silence the entire room. If Amara's story inspired you, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. We'd also love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments below, and make sure to